So we talked about this last week. So you're always going to start with your kind of practical problem, which is, there's something that I have an itch, something that I don't understand, and that motivates your research question. And that research question then begins to define the way you're going to address your research problem. So your research problem and your practical problem are not the same thing, okay? But your practical problem is what motivates you down this road to research, okay? And the research problem will then help you kind of find a research answer, which will then solve that practical problem, okay? So most people start here, and they think that the practical problem, is the research problem, but it's not the same. Okay, because you do need to go through this question of what is the research question. So this takes work, okay? And a lot of this work is done through the literature review. So that's why we're going to focus on literature review and how important it is. But another thing that's very important to understand is, at least the way I see it, okay, is the literature review is a big part of the research, especially in the humanities, because what we do is we end up doing some sort of analysis of that text. And while other people in other fields like social sciences, for them the research is locating the source and analyzing that source. But in my mind, at least, a lot of times the research that gets done in the humanities is reading up on the pertinent literature first and understanding the state of the field and the particular research question. And that is almost the bulk of the research. And then finally, then you have a real kind of important question. Then you would actually analyze the literature or the film or the game or the cultural text. Because locating that cultural text is not that difficult when it comes to literary studies, for example. Now, if you're an ethnographer and you need to go into the field and, let's say, go to villages in, what is it, Yunnan, and find folk music, then that's the research, okay? But for us, the texts are not that hard to find, and so really a lot of the research comes into doing the literature review, which is right here, okay? Looking for the correct research question or the best research question for addressing what you're trying to understand and defining the research problem. Okay, so the research problem will then lead you to the kind of investigation you're doing about that text, and then once you conduct that investigation, right? So that's your methodology, and your mode of a sort of analysis. That will lead you to a research answer which addresses that practical problem. Okay, all right. So, like we said, research problems motivated not by palpable unhappiness, but by incomplete knowledge or flawed understanding. So you solve it not by changing the world, but by understanding it better. But then by understanding it better, that's where the change in the world can happen. Okay? So that's why it's important to understand, and why I ask you to do this research argumentation, where you identify the topic, come up with the question, and then find the conceptual significance and a potential practical application. Okay? So I gave you a template. So I want you to be able to use that. And this is very important, and you'll be writing this into your introduction, okay? And you'll be focusing more on certain questions like the potential practical application more in the conclusion of your dissertation, okay? Jessie came up with a really good question, so I wanted to talk about that today. She wanted to ask, what's the difference between the conceptual significance as opposed to the question? And Jessie had a little bit of trouble understanding the difference, and also the potential practical application. So how did these three differentiate each other? And I can understand why that might be an issue, because I want to find out how politicians use stories of great events to shape public opinion. Might seem not that different from, in order to help readers understand, how politicians use elements of popular culture to advance their political goals. Okay, but here's the thing, okay? The question and the conceptual significance are different, because the question is, what's going on? Why is this happening, right? And then the conceptual significance is, this is a tool. The concept is a tool. It's significant because it can help you understand by looking at something specific, okay? So the question is, how do politicians use, in this example, how do politicians use stories, okay? And the conceptual significance is they use elements of popular culture to advance political goals. Right? So the conceptual significance is linking something together. So Jessie's example, I think, was really good. So I'm going to focus on that. So Jessie's question is, how people use female bodies as a site of resistance against the government authority. And how does it influence people's perception of female empowerment and female agency? So yeah, that's a very good question. It's like, how do female bodies or representations of female bodies get used for political or cultural politics? Okay. Now, the conceptual significance that Jesse writes is help readers understand how Hong Kong protesters comment on gender and sexuality, especially the significance of the body and the condemnation of sexual violence. Okay, so this is not that strong, okay, because helping readers understand is actually still part of the research question. Okay, the question is, how do readers comment on, or how do Hong Kong protesters comment, okay, using female bodies? That's still the question. But the significance of the body is the conceptual significance, okay? That's the methodology. So analyzing representations of the female body in political discourse, that's what's conceptually happening. Okay, so this is different from the question. The question is, how do bodies get used? The concept is focusing on the bodies and what do bodies do. Okay, so basically a reader, when they understand the conceptual significance, they will be able to use it as a methodology, and they understand why that methodology is useful. Okay, why is it significance? So this is the way I would have rephrased it. In order to help readers understand how images of the female body are used to mobilize political discourse. So when someone understands your conceptual significance, then they also know how to use your methodology to apply it to their research question. So in this case, the conceptual significance is the female body. If you understand it and analyze how it's represented, then you can use that to understand political discourse and how it's mobilized in different ways, whether that's in Hong Kong protest movements or in, I don't know, like an Oscar campaign for, like a movie or something, or, the ways that women's bodies are used when it comes to selling cosmetics or something like that. Okay. So then the potential practical application that Jesse wrote is so that readers can better understand the mechanism of the movement propaganda. Now, for me, this is actually the conceptual significance. Being able to understand the mechanism, how something works, okay, that's the conceptual significance. Okay? Whereas express themselves and contribute to the protection of human rights as well as the empowerment of women, that is practical, but it's a bit vague. So a practical application might be something like so that they can, draw attention to, how women are being used in certain ways or something like that. Okay, the practical application is kind of up to you, and you can think it over on your own. Okay, I'm not super concerned about the practical application, but I think that the practical application should go back to, in a certain way, your original practical problem. Like, why is it that you want to understand that question in the first place? For some that might be like, oh, I want to understand, why I'm so drawn to these books about existential questions, or, why I'm so interested in, a certain type of movie or something like that. Okay. So, but the practical application is kind of limitless. And, one very strong kind of practical application you could use for Jesse's example, and I think I wrote this here, is something like, well, if you understand that how women's bodies and representations of women's bodies are being used in movement propaganda, then a practical application could be something like, well, then you can then indicate to people who are doing this how their work alienates those who might be supportive of their movement otherwise. So for example, right, like if I'm considering supporting a certain movement, but then I look at the image and for me it's super sexist, then it would be really useful and practical for that group of people who are creating this movement material to understand, because then they might not alienate other people who might see things as sexist or offensive in some way. So that's a potential practical application. Okay, so now you understand conceptual significance is about the methodology. Okay, all right, cool. So yeah, so I thought that most of you had pretty good topic. And this question of what you want to find out. And we're really kind of getting to the point where we're identifying some significant concept that will help you analyze the text. Whereas the potential practical application, you're going to have to think that a bit more and kind of, but don't worry, that is something that happens more in your conclusion. Okay. All right. So last week we stopped with this question: How do you find a good research problem? So let me see how much time we've used so far. Okay. I don't have a timer. Okay. I'll just try to go faster. How do you find a good research problem? The literature review. Okay. I cannot emphasize enough how important the literature review is. Okay. Because the literature review tells you what other people have already found. What are their findings? Okay. And how have they tried to address your research question? So it's really kind of educating yourself, but also it's not just educating yourself, but after you have educated yourself by doing all the reading, writing it up and summarizing it in a way so that other people understand the state of the field and why your particular approach to the research problem is appropriate. So one, establish the status quo. Know what's going on, right? So if you think of the research field as like let's say it's a battlefield. Okay, or you can think of it like a chessboard or something like that. You have a field, and you need to know what's going on in that field. You can't just, without looking at the field and analyzing it, you can't just be like, well, I'm going to help this field and my agenda by doing this, addressing this research. Well, if you don't know what's going on in the field already, how are you gonna contribute? So the key with the literature review is not only are you identifying what is the kind of most appropriate way to understand this research and analyze it, but also it helps you understand what other people have already done. So when people say research is standing on the shoulders of giants, well, this is you climbing onto that giant and standing up. You need to navigate what they've been through. You understand what they've studied so that you can contribute and kind of add. So eventually people can also stand on your back too, okay? So this also helps you formulate the problem or the research inquiry. Like, it's important to understand why is it that other people are studying this problem this way. And I think that this is really kind of, I don't want to say common sense, but it makes a lot of practical sense when we think about it in terms of other fields like, science, like sciences or research. Like, let's say you're studying climate change. And and your practical problem is, I want to understand why it is that our climate is getting worse, or becoming less stable for human habitation. Now, if you were actually to do that study, you wouldn't just be like, well, I'm going to study it by, taking temperatures in the ozone layer or something like that. Because how do you know that that's useful? How do you know that that's something that will be helpful unless you've studied and understand everything else that has already been written about that specific problem? So, like, let's say you were going to write about climate change. If you don't do a literature review, then you're just going to blindly dive in. But if you actually do the study, then you might realize, okay, people have already studied temperature change in ozone. People have already written about how, these temperatures have changed over time. But then the real question is that temperature rising because of human intervention, or is it because of just some sort of natural cycle in the Earth's movements, for example? Okay, and then you would get into the debates of why is it important to understand the differences between these two? And then you might look for a better research question like, oh, can you link something to that? Like, can you link, human, factories and their CO2 emissions to rising temperatures? So your research question will get more and more refined as you study that literature. Now, this is also the same for humanities. When we're studying, whether it's film, like, let's say you want to study the films of Kurosawa or something like that. If you don't do a literature review first, you're not going to understand what are the pertinent questions. You might be like, I'm going to write about why Kurosawa's films are so great. But it's like, okay, if you do a literature review, you might find that, okay, many people agree that, Kurosawa's films are great, but they don't agree about why it is that they're great. Some people might say it's the cinematography. Some people might say it's, its cultural importance at that time. And so as you begin to understand those debates, it becomes clearer and clearer what it is that you need to be answering and how you will contribute to that field. Because you're no longer just writing for yourself. Okay, as a researcher, you're not just trying to understand something that you want to understand. You're trying to contribute to a global or, at least academic understanding of the importance of that text and its significance to some sort of perhaps practical problem. So you're formulating the problem and the research inquiry, and you're defining the value, all right? So another question is why would I want to read your study of Kurosawa? Why is it important for me to read what you, it's not just because, oh, Kurosawa is interesting. You need to demonstrate that there is a gap in the research. Like, people have not understood Kurosawa from this particular perspective. Like, for example, okay, and I'm making this up because I have no idea, but let's say, for example, that everyone talks about how Kurosawa is such a great director, but actually, whoever wrote his screenplays is actually really, really important. And as you do the literature review, you're finding no one talks about that. And no one talks about its significance, especially to his canonical films, like The Seven Samurai or something like that. So only by doing the literature review can you identify what's missing and why it is that your research is important. Okay? Otherwise, you're going to be doing the same thing over and over again that someone else has already done, and you're not contributing anything new. Fourthly, I guess, you're comparing your findings with your own research. So if you read, let's say you have watched Kurosawa films and you've taken notes and you're like, the importance of the sun, the image of the sun, is really important in Kurosawa films. And you read other people's work and they're like, the importance of the sun we also think it's very, very important. You're comparing your findings. Okay? This is important, not just for corroboration, but also for seeing difference. If you differ from them, that's very significant. Okay? So ultimately, the literature review describes, summarizes, evaluates, clarifies, and or integrates the contents or primary reports. And it demonstrates the successful completion of the exploratory process. It maps out the field and it proves that you know and understand the field. So when I'm grading a dissertation, actually for me, the literature review is pretty much the most important thing, because it demonstrates to me that this scholar actually knows what is important to analyze. And the stronger the literature review, then the stronger the analysis that comes later will be, because it's already kind of sharpened, the kind of inquiry. A very strong literature review will lead to strong research, because it really kind of sharpens the stick, you could say. It knows, exactly what it is that you need to be addressing, and what's the significance of that, of addressing it. So when you do the literature review, you begin to formulate the exact questions you need to be asking when it comes to your research. And a really good question is pretty much the majority of the battle when it comes to research, I think. All right. So another thing about this then is the question here is, it's not just about what do literature reviews do, but how do you write a literature review? Okay. So when you're writing your literature review, you need to be addressing these things. What's the status quo? What's the problem? Okay? And why is it valuable to pursue that line of inquiry? And you need to use these citations or these sources to back up the reasoning. Okay? And it describes, summarizes, evaluates, or clarifies. So even though you may read a ton of work that might not really address the research question that you're asking, then that's not going to go into the literature review. That doesn't mean that it wasn't worthwhile to do that research. Half the time when I read, I'm not sure if this is really going to end up in my literature review, but it's still important to understand it, whether it goes into that kind of literature review or not, and whether or not it kind of addresses the research question. But you still have to do the research. That's part of your explanatory process. So overall, you're going to be, when you do a literature review, you're going to be walking your reader through your summary of the field so that they understand, the kind of direction that you're taking them in. Now, let's say you're like a tour guide. Okay, when you're doing a literature review, you're acting as a sort of tour guide, and the reader is your sort of client. They're the person they're the tourist who's going through. Now, as the tour guide, you're taking them on a sort of direction. You're telling them a sort of story about the field and what's going on. But you, as the tour guide, have actually seen much more of the field than what you're going to show them. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean, like, let's say you're taking them on a tour of Hong Kong, for example, and you want to design your tour in a way that is very much, addressing a specific research question. So your tour, your tour that you're taking them on could be like, what is the influence of British colonialism on present day Hong Kong? So then that means that you might not be taking them to the Hong Kong Geopark, or you might not be taking them to Ocean Park unless you can weave it into that kind of story. Now, that doesn't mean that you haven't been to Ocean Park. You do need to go to Ocean Park so that you know whether or not it fits into that question. Or also so you can evaluate other research questions. So that, for example, in this tour, you're doing a tour of, the British colonial influence on Hong Kong. But the next one, you might be talking about, what are the sort of natural and environmental features of Hong Kong? Okay, so, but that doesn't necessarily go into that particular tour. Same the thing with your literature review. When you write up your literature review, your reader needs to know that there's a specific topic and a kind of goal that they're going through as they're going on this tour. Same thing, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that you don't study every aspect of Hong Kong that might end up, you needing to write about. But in the particular literature review for this particular dissertation, you are taking a reader on one in particular, okay? All right, so why do lit reviews matter? It enables your research to engage at a high conceptual level with other people's scholarship, okay? So you're no longer in this kind of vacuum where it's like, I did a close reading of this movie or this book. Instead, you're going to do a close reading after you've read what everyone else has said about that book or that novel or whatever, in order to know what you're going to say is going to be different. So then it also enables you to see how your research contributes to knowledge and meaning. So not only are you finding out what other people have said, but you're also finding out how is it that what you're going to say could actually help other people understand the topic better. It also means that you're addressing the proper audience. You're working at the right level. Okay, so, like those of you who do want to write about Kurosawa, and you do want to advance the field of Japanese cinema, well, you need to know what scholars of Japanese cinema are saying about it right now. Because you could write this entire study about Kurosawa that all these people in Japanese film studies will be like, this doesn't matter. This is not important. We don't really care. Okay? Like, going back to our science example of environmental science, like, let's say you're like, the research question that I think will really, help us understand climate change is the temperatures, of, I don't know. I'm trying to think of something that would not apply. It's a little harder. I don't know. The body temperature of, human beings, have they gone up or gone down, in the last 20 years? Like, for a biologist, maybe this might be quite interesting, but for an environmental scientist, this might not really help them address their research question. The only way to know whether or not it really will help that field is to do the literature review. Lastly, like I said, it helps you stand on the shoulders of giants. Okay. So lit reviews help you become familiar with the conversation. Okay. So all scholarship is taking part in a conversation. It's a discourse. So you don't want to be talking to yourself. You want to be talking to other people. So this is the way to talk to other people is first you have to listen. And after you listen, you need to be able to say, I know exactly what you mean. And I'm going to rephrase what you mean and recount it back to you through my understanding. And that will then help you address and talk with them. Okay? Have you ever had someone try to talk to you, but then they're not really listening to you, so you're not really having a conversation? That's like doing research without doing a literature review. When someone really is talking with you, the first thing that they can say is, okay, I think I understand what you mean. You're saying that, the way to understand climate change is to really understand the role of human industrial processes in changing the temperature of, or changing our climate. So with that in mind, then, I think that, and then this is where you would input your own intervention. You would say, well, then, with that in mind, I think that the best way to understand whether or not humans have are making an influence in climate change is to study temperatures after the Industrial Revolution, or something like that. Okay? So that means that you're actually part of the conversation as opposed to just interjecting something. And also it helps you identify the appropriate research question. Like, I have not done a literature review on climate change, so I don't know if studies of the Industrial Revolution is what matters. Maybe we need studies of the data revolution and how, these server farms actually contribute to climate change. I don't know, okay? Understand the nature of previous research and issues surrounding research questions. Find evidence to establish the need for proposed research. So this is really important, and this is why it is its own form of research, is you need to establish to other scholars why it is that your study is important, okay? So that means that when it comes to any type of research you do in the future, whether that's, a research that you're doing for some private consulting company, or if you're, writing up a research grant, you need to establish why it is that your research needs to be done. Okay? Because, right now, the research that you're doing, pretty much the only resource used is your time, okay, and your energy. But in the future, the research that you do will not just be about your personal time and energy, but it might cost money. People might need to invest in that research in order to get it done. Like, let's say you want to research, very hard to find archival texts, and you need to pay money to go in to look for that archive. Or, let's say you want to do some sort of research that examines teaching and how effective teaching is. You need to hire, researchers. You need to hire participants, in order to conduct this time. And you need to, justify that expenditure on the part of the university or the grant. In order to establish the need for that research, you need to write the literature review and locate the aporia. You need to say, this is what's missing. And you need to provide evidence that this is what's missing. Okay, so you can think of it as when you're writing a literature review. Okay, let's see if I can. Okay, I like to do this kind of graphically. So let's see if there's some sort of application I can use. Photo booth, preview, other, maybe some sort of paintbrush or something. Text edit, image capture. I probably should have thought of this beforehand. I'm sorry. Just give me a second. Let me find something. Oops. It used to be that in Microsoft you could use like Microsoft Paint. You can just draw things. But I don't know what to use in this case. Okay, let's just go back to using PowerPoint. Okay, so let's say, for example, right, not too happy using this, but whatever. Okay, picture, paint, right? Is this some sort of paint? No. Okay, I'll just use shapes, okay? So let's say, right, you are starting off in your research, right? You wouldn't just start off and just start kind of putting things in. You would want to kind of create a sort of framework for, why it is that you're justified in doing your research. So imagine that your research, you're using a kind of like lens. You're using some sort of magnifying lens to kind of identify something that's missing, okay? In order to know what's already missing, you need to know what's kind of full. So let's say that this is like a blank canvas and we don't know what's behind it. Imagine that all of this is just white, but actually there's stuff behind it, but we don't know. Okay. In order to understand what part of it you need to study, like this is your object that you want to research and you want to study, you need to see what other people have done. So for example, right, like let's say some people have already studied this object, which this is this kind of blank canvas, by looking at it as, our research methodology is to examine it by making straight lines. So they've made a bunch of straight lines across this. They've created oh man, this is so much harder than doing this in class. Like, okay, no, this is going to take too long. Okay. There must be something I can use. Sorry. Okay, I'm just going to Google something. Okay, paintbrush for Mac OS. Paintbrush is a reference. Mac Paint. Do I have to download it? Okay. All right. So I'll go back to that. Or I'm gonna pause and. Okay, yeah, I'm going to pause this. Okay, and we're back. All right, so I apologize for that break, but I have downloaded a paintbrush application, so we can use that. All right. So the reason why I want to use a paintbrush app is because I think it's a quite valuable way to think about how we're approaching our research. Okay. So let's say, for example, then, okay, that we have a cultural object. Okay, this could be your text, it could be a book, it could be a film, it could be a dance, whatever, okay? It could be a social situation, a phenomenon, right? But let's just say, for example, that right now our cultural object is this block of black square or rectangle. So I need to know how it is that other people have approached this block. Now, if I just go in there and I just start doing my thing, I could be uncovering things that people have already uncovered. Okay, so right now I'm using this metaphor of something that needs to be uncovered or digged out or closely scrutinized or investigated. Okay, now not everything uses this kind of mindset, right? Just to clarify, but let's just stick with that analogy for now. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is I want to understand how is it that other people have looked at this object. Okay. So first of all, you can't take for granted that, people can all see it in a certain way, right? So some people, the way that they might try to map out or understand an object is they might do something like, oh, what my methodology is, I'm going to identify, certain things by looking at it a certain way. So let's just say, for a metaphor, as an analogy, right, that my way of looking at it will be, I'm going to make straight lines, okay? I'm going to make straight lines that are quite big, okay? So I'm going to make straight lines on this object in order to kind of carve out what I see, okay? So, okay, whatever, my lines don't need to be super straight, okay? All right, so, I have made, so in my study of this cultural object, I made straight horizontal lines, okay? So then I would be like, okay, well then people have already made horizontal lines, right? So then maybe the type of research I want to do might be like looking at it from vertical lines. So then another scholar would be like, okay, well, we know already that, when you make horizontal lines, this is what you see. You get these kind of results. So then what happens when we make vertical lines instead? So I make vertical lines, right? So this next scholar came in and made vertical lines. So, and once they made vertical lines, they began to see certain kinds of things. It's like, oh, when you make vertical lines, then you see different kinds of results. Maybe the cultural object, seems to be more this way or that way, okay? And also, when you do your literature review, you can also criticize other people's methodologies. So it's like, okay, well, Dr. Ko's did a vertical line methodology, but his vertical lines were not very straight. So then we have some problems. So maybe someone might want to go in again and make better vertical lines. So they would go in and be like, okay, those vertical lines were bad. So we're going to make better vertical lines. And so we get sort of results or whatever, right? So, okay, whatever. Okay, this is not really important. But the idea is that you can criticize other people's methodologies. So, and then you would compare these kind of things together. So it's like, okay, so those who have made vertical lines, got these results. And when you combine those with those who made horizontal lines, you get certain effects, right? So in this example, this wasn't something I was doing on purpose, right? But do you notice that you're getting a sort of optical effect of kind of black dots appearing here because of optical effects? That's the combination of these two different, methodologies, okay? And you might get certain effects like that too that only come up when you understand people's findings in relation to each other. So let's say the state of the field is that, oh, you got cuts, right? But then maybe someone else might be like, something more useful to think about is like, instead of using vertical lines, what do you uncover about this object when you make certain squares, right? Or circles, right? So what happens when you observe it by putting circles in certain grids or something like that, right? So now a lot of different things have been mapped out. Okay, this has been mapped out, that has been mapped out, that has been mapped out. Now, these are all different ways to look at the cultural object. And these different ways of mapping it enable you to see different kinds of perspectives. So every type of methodology you use adds a different kind of texture, a different shape to thinking about it, right? So like, let's say then that, like your methodology might be something different. It's like, okay, well, the methodology everyone has used so far has been in black and white. Maybe the methodology I want to use will be to use a different type of color. And what happens when we use a different color to analyze these things, right? So all of these kind of ways of analyzing this object have been done in white, right? On a black. Well, what if we try red? So I'm going to use a different method. My method is going to use red to fill in these lines and see what kind of effects we get. So now the effect is very, very different. Okay, so now we understand a lot more about this cultural object because we're using this different methodology, right? And eventually you might have something where it's like, people have done enough. People understand that this entire, and let's go back to, something, let's say white, okay? Let's say people have understood that actually, like focusing on this particular section is most interesting. This section is most important, okay? Sorry, I was going to do this. And actually, this is already understood. And we understand this section very well too. Some other scholar came in and did this section, okay? Some other scholar came in and did this section. And some other scholar has kind of provided a very comprehensive understanding of this part. And, scholar X, has said, okay, these are the kind of things that we understand. So we don't have a complete picture, but now we have an understanding of what's missing, right? And what's missing might be our ability to look at something in significant detail. So you might be able to say, hey, although people have a very good kind of clear picture of the overall, some people we still might not have a very good idea of this particular part right here. This part right here, okay? But how are you going to explain to people why it is that you want to study that part? You need to be able to show them the overall picture and the story of how different parts of this cultural object have been kind of delineated so that you can understand it. So now you're at this part where you're like, okay, my literature review enables me to identify to you, the reader, why it is that we need to focus on this part and use this particular methodology. And the methodology I want to use is the spray paint methodology. The spray paint methodology on this particular section, zoomed in, allows us to see something very significant, right? And by doing that, we're revealing something about the cultural object. Now, this might be the most important thing you could do for the overall picture, the overall idea of our understanding of the overall cultural object. But we can't do that until you identify and explain what other scholars have already done in order to understand this particular aspect. Okay? So I hope that metaphor helps. What I'm trying to say is the lit review helps you become familiar with what other people do, identify the appropriate research question, find evidence to establish the need for the proposed research, and stay current with what others have done. And then plan out your research plan, okay? And develop something original, all right? So yeah, yours is not the role of summarizing, okay? So this is another thing that people make mistake, is they summarize what other people have done. But actually, no, you need to kind of tell a story, and you engage in a dialogue of what has been discovered in the field in application to your particular research question and what is to be written and discovered by others. You don't list and annotate. You do that for your annotated bibliography, but what you want to do is you want to dialogue. So in order to dialogue, you can say, what are the key debates and previous questions in the current work? What are the key discussions and agreements? What are the key theories? What are the examples of these theories in practice as demonstrated by others? So I think what I can do is I can give you a short example. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's see first. Yeah. So, you need to know what you're going to contribute. So you need to summarize first in order to understand, but then you synthesize and you bring your ideas together. You focus on their patterns and you look at different debates. And as you conduct your own research, you begin to see how it fits into these arguments. Okay. All right. So, obviously to do that, you need to read widely, right? You need to read what other people have done. So that you can have a big summary kind of picture. Take notes, even if you don't know yet how it applies to your research. Summarize in order to engage with their ideas. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do. So one sort of example would be like of a literature review is like what I did for my MA dissertation. Is my literature review started off with this kind of question. It's like, what have people said already about this particular filmmaker? And I was doing it on Ozu, and and how Ozu's work is related to other kind of more contemporary filmmakers that people often compare him to, positively, or compare as saying that they are similar, such as Hou Xiaoxian, for example. So I pretty much read everything that had been written about Ozu, about Hou Xiaoxian, about this other filmmaker, and also about the works that people have compared favorably between them. Okay, and what I began to find is that there were kind of key questions and disagreements, okay? And those began to be the kind of analytical lenses that I would use to kind of write out my literature review. So one of the key questions was, what's the importance of something like the pillow shot, which, a lot of people kept talking about as this kind of particular type of shot that Ozu would use where the camera would be, placed much, much lower in the kind of field of vision, as if you were looking at it from the point of view from a pillow, or, and then my question would be like, is this really the most important thing that marks out Ozu as a filmmaker? And I looked at the disagreements, Another discussion that sort of came up as I was reading the literature that a lot of people talked about was, is this considered something that's very Asian? Is this something that's considered very Buddhist? Is it considered very Japanese? And what were the important questions that had to do with that? Is it national identity? Is it cultural identity? Is it modernity? Okay. And then a lot of other questions that came up too was like, what does it have to do with the representation of women and this kind of notion of time and history? Why is it that women get kind of used as a symbol or a metaphor? And so these were the kind of different debates that were going on in this scholarship. And yet, not all of these have to do with each other. So I had to organize my literature review in a way that sort of demonstrates that I understand what people are talking about and that what I'm trying to say will help address those questions. Okay. And also point out what's missing. So my way of saying this is I was saying okay, well, if we talk about Ozu's work, only in terms of Ozu, and we say that it's Asian, then that doesn't really make sense because there are a lot of other filmmakers who are also quote Asian, right, or have underwent a similar type of modernity. And in this case, my example would be that you have this kind of American post World War II Pacific modernity, that happens with these countries that have been sort of kind of incorporated into a kind of American Pacific, economic system of modernity. And so and also obviously Hollywood, right? So how would that type of, modern economic system influence filmmaking in one way or another? So I was able to locate some sort of historical referent that could be used to identify the kind of, and answer the sorts of questions people are asking. So is it really Japaneseness? Or is it really a sort of experience of modernity that's generalized and localizable to filmmaking in this particular area? So by doing that literature review, I was able to refine my research question considerably. Okay? So that's what you also want to be doing with your research question. By understanding what other people have said, then you as well will be able to identify, the ways that you will be able to contribute to that research and answer the big questions. Okay? All right. So yeah. Summarize for, read widely. Okay, so yeah. And so you need to take notes as you're reading. This is really important because you're not going to know for sure how this applies to what you're doing. And also because as you're reading their work, you're also mapping out the field in your own way mentally so that you're kind of understanding the cultural object better. Okay, so when you're reading other literature reviews, I think this is important, is understand how the author uses the literature. It's not just presenting information. It's explaining how it's useful to, guiding your research project. How is that literature organized into themes, debates, disagreements? Okay? What is the common thread of the argument that brings it together? Okay, and this is very important. Your literature review needs to have a common thread. Okay? There needs to be, your literature review is basically, it's a discussion. You're not doing the discussing, but then you're organizing what other people have said into a discussion around a particular research problem. So for example, let's go back to my Ozu example. I would start off with saying I would identify the research question. I would be many people have said that Yasujiro Ozu is the most Asian of all directors. That his style and his content, reflect Asianness. Okay. Now, other scholars have sort of taken this up. So, for example, Donald Ritchie has talked about how, his works really, really kind of represent Zen in a certain way, or some sort of awareness of, things like a mano no aware. And so then I would talk about that a little more and say, this is the evidence that he provides for using this particular framework. And then I would say, but then other scholars, including Ozu himself, actually disagrees with this assessment. And then I would say the reasons that they disagree is because, they think that Donald Ritchie is doing some form of Orientalism, where he's actually, saying that this thing is Asian when actually, Ozu, may say that the filmmakers that he's most similar to are early cinema, silent cinema directors who do use long shots for, technological reasons, for example. And then I could talk about David Bordwell or these other filmmakers. But then I could say that, and then after that, then I would shift the conversation again and be okay, so even if you think that the reasons why Ozu's style is particularly made not because it's Asian and because it reflects some sort of Asian, Japanese, Zen identity, but because of technological reasons, for cinematic reasons, right? Like for storytelling. But then I could, then I would bring up another scholar's counterpoint would be like, if you say that, then you're saying that there's nothing cultural or nothing culturally specific to the work that Ozu has done, and that it doesn't have any influence. And that would also be an oversimplification of the issue. Right. So then I would say, okay, well, certain scholars say that you can look at issues of Japanese modernity and how that influences, cinematic reception of Ozu's work, and so on and so forth. So then I'm conducting a discussion through the literature review and I'm threading it with a sort of argument about this overall question, like, is there such thing as Asianness when it comes to Ozu cinema? Okay. And then eventually I will get to my sort of point. I'll be like, okay, so people have said this, and people disagreed with that, and then people disagreed with that, and people disagreed with that. And ultimately, I think that the best way to answer this question is the way that I want to answer it, is by comparing his work to other Asian directors who maybe be a closer fit stylistically, but then maybe are part of a different country or have experienced a different type of modernity or something like that. Or use a different kind of topic in order to really kind of get at this question. But I'm only able to do that through the literature review, and also in order to identify to my readers and explain to my readers why it is that I want to go in that direction. So you need to be able to do the same thing with your dissertation research. You need to be able to identify the kind of ongoing arguments that are taking place in the field, and the kind of trajectory, and then after you go through this kind of long, not too long, but at least detailed and explicit discussion thread, like let's say it's like, then you would make your own mark. I don't know, one very easy kind of visual way to rethink this would be like a message board or like a forum or like a Twitter thread. You would see, okay, this poster said this person responded, this person responded, this person responded. If you want to respond, you need to read everything that everyone else has said first in order to advance the conversation. Okay. Otherwise, your addition to this forum thread or this Twitter remark will not help the conversation in any way. So your literature review needs to do that, following a certain discussion thread, and then you would add on to it at the end. Okay. So another thing that's important is literature reviews are ongoing. So the final literature review that you do is going to go through a lot of revisions. You start off with literature review, you identify the research you're going to do, then you realize, oh, hey, maybe I need to go back and research again. So do it before you begin research writing, do it after completing research writing, do it during research and writing. You will constantly refer back to literature review. Okay, the literature review, and I really like this analogy, it's the soil from which your plants grow. You will always be underpinning your points and arguments with reference to key theorists and the experts in the field. Now, this doesn't mean that you're copying them. If anything, it might mean that you're breaking off from them. Okay? That you're saying, okay, other people did this, and that gives me a stable platform from which to perform my own research and say how I differ, from their work. Okay? So all arguments take the form of building on or critiquing some form of previously established knowledge. That doesn't mean that and a critique actually makes what other people say stronger. I know this sounds strange, but you're not undermining them. You're building on their work, okay? All right. So where do you find literature, okay? Hopefully you've gotten pretty good at this by now, but you check the footnotes and reference sections of key books, articles, and other research papers. Read other literature reviews, but understand that you will use the literature in different ways with different angles of attack, okay? So like, let's say I read a literature review of Ozu, right? And it's entirely about, the pillow shot. I can use that and I can read the original research, right? And like, let's say this literature review of the pillow shot, talks about these, rights, includes the academic work of these 5 different scholars. Now, these 5 different scholars didn't only talk about the pillow shot. So I might go back to the work and be like, okay, well, what does this scholar say about the vase shot, for example, or the use of parallelism? Okay, all of these scholars will have many of things to have said, so you can trace back and look at what else that scholar has said. Okay, another thing you can do is you can join reading groups, read journals, obviously Google scholar searches. Okay, you just need to keep reading. The more reading you do, the more you'll find. The more you find, then the more you'll find, and it just keeps building like that. Okay, all right. So Keep adjusting as needed. Be flexible. So you design a search strategy plan, you implement the strat, you record the results, then you redesign the strategy, and then you reflect and you start again. And you just keep going, okay? This is the process of research. And to be honest with you, when you submit your dissertation, it's not going to be the final, okay? It's still just going to be one step in a longer research journey of your kind of overall research trajectory. Okay? So just keep open-minded, right? Growth mindset, okay? Your research is always growing. Okay. All right. So let's say you are at a workshop. Okay. So you would select a journal article that relates to your research topic, and then you do what's called SQ3R. SQ3R stands for the four things you're going to do. So you write down the key points, the full citation details, the author, subject, etc. On some sort of easy to understand filing system. Like I said last week, right? You can use an index card, you can use Trello, you can use Evernote, whatever. EndNote also does this. Okay, I just don't know how to use it. Decide where and under what headings you want to file it in. You tag it with keywords, and then consider how these headings fit into your literature review chapter. Okay. So the SQ3R method for note taking. First, you survey. You quick read through that article or whatever. You identify the main points and establish if it's worth reading closely. Okay, so for my example, then I'm going to do some work. All right, so like I'm teaching a class on gender and colonialism. Okay, so decolonizing gender. So this is one that I'm kind of preparing for my lecture, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm going to survey first. Heterosexualism and the colonial modern gender system. Okay, so modern, okay, and heterosexualism. So it's focusing on two things specifically. Heterosexuality, colonialism, and gender as a system. I already know that, okay? So then I would look at what colonial power is understood by this person, characteristics of global, Eurocentric capitalist power that's organized around two axes, okay? Coloniality of power and modernity. Okay, so I know that this is kind of like a world systems kind of approach too. Okay, introduces the basic and universal social classification of the population of the planet in terms of the ideas of race. Okay, so this is a very Foucauldian way of looking at it. Universal social classification of the population. Just think about coloniality as a form of biopower. Okay, so then I'm gonna okay, so this is a way of thinking about biopower, populations, race. Okay, so I would start surveying these things. So in this essay, Lugonis introduces a systematic understanding of gender constituted by colonial modernity in terms of multiple relations of power. Okay, so it's talking about the construction of gender. Okay, has a light and dark side that depict relations and beings in relations as deeply different and thus calling for very different patterns of violent abuse. Lugonis argues that gender itself is a colonial introduction, a violent introduction consistently and contemporarily used to destroy people's cosmologies and communities as a building ground of the civilized West. So it's a critique of Western imperialism. Okay, so already from the abstract alone, I understand the main points, and yes, it's definitely worth reading closely, okay, especially for my course, because it's going to provide evidence and also substantive critique, okay, of these things. Okay, so I've already done the survey. What's next? Question, what was that about? Okay, all right, so what's it about? It's about how a colonial system creates the gender norms that we understand, okay, and how that is part of the colonialist imperialism. Okay, got it. Right. Then I read. So I would look through it all and I'd read it carefully and I would read. So what I do usually is I will read and I'll highlight and I'll kind of copy down sections that I think are important. So let's say, for example, right, that I'm doing my note taking for this. Okay, so for me, I use Trello, right? Okay, decolonizing gender. Okay, I would create a new card and it would be academic reading, Lugonis. What is it? I should have done this in the first one. Heterosexualism, the colonial modern gender system. Okay. Heterosexualism and the modern colonial gender system. Okay. Then I would put down the citation. So lib HKU. Okay. Lugonis, heterosexualism, colonialism. Oh, heterosexism. Right, I wrote the wrong thing. Sexism. Is it colonial power? Modern. Sorry, I'm just doing this to... Oh, there it is. Okay, so heterosexualism in the colonial modern gender system, okay, then I would want the citation. So you could also do this yourself, which is probably better, right? But this was in Hypatia. Hypatia? I don't know, it's Greek. Okay, where am I? Okay, so there's the citation. Okay, all right, cool. All right, so then I would start, like, what are my keywords, right? What are my keywords, right? It's like colonial. Okay, or what's the question? How does the colonial system of social classification generate gender norms used to justify European imperialism? Okay, all right, so got that. That's a big part of it, right? So does this have to do with my research? Well, yes, for this course, okay? So then I would say, okay, so now I'm going to find the particular quotations that really matter to me, okay? Post-pre-colonial European gender arrangement implies it imposed a new gender system. A new gender system that created very different ranges of colonialism than for white bourgeois colonists. Thus, it introduced many genders. Okay, so this is really important, right? So then I would put that, right? And then I would put the page number 186. Okay, and then I'd write something. I'd be like, okay, Lugonis argues that the gender system implemented in the colonies is not what Europeans followed pre-colonially, before they colonized in Europe. Okay, let's just say. Instead, it's a new system of gender that was used to enforce the colonial power, and actually the colonizers themselves didn't even use this gender system. Okay, so that's a really important point, all right? So I say that, okay? All right, so that might be a whole paragraph in my literature review, okay? All right, but then if you think about it too, it's like when I write my literature review, this is actually going to be, I would just copy paste this part, right? And then I would kind of write up that paragraph. So you're already doing a lot of the work, okay? So, but then, we cannot understand this gender system without understanding what Quijano calls the coloniality of power. The reason to historicize gender is that without history. So then I would say something like, okay, methodology. Understand history of coloniality of power and its institutions. Okay, so I would say, like, this is the methodology that Lugonis uses, taken from Quijano, because blah, blah, blah. Okay, so on and so forth, okay? All right, so then I would just keep going and keep doing that, okay? Not everything is going to make it into my essay, okay? But I'm reading it very carefully, okay? And I'm taking good notes, all right? And record, okay? So this is what I was just doing there, right? You note the main ideas and the arguments. Note citations you need to follow up. Structure your notes and process the arguments. Make subnotes and discussion points, commenting. So create those main headings too, okay? So sometimes what I'll do, right, if it's actually something that's really long, or really useful, I might give it its own list, so I'll be like Lugonis reading, right? And then I might be like, okay, so this is the section on methodology. So then I would start, putting all the stuff about the methodology. And then this would be like the data. It would be like, the, examples of the, indigenous people and their gender system, and then I would, put the, page 168 talks about, and then blah, 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 so on and so forth, okay? And then I would just keep denying, keep filling in these cards, like conclusion, blah, 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 okay? Main points, okay? So you could do it that way as well. And that's, that's also pretty useful way to do it, okay? Then you would review. So this SQ3R is 3 R's, okay? So first it's survey, SQ, question, and then there's 3 R's. The 3 R's are read, record, okay? And I recommend that you read and record at the same time. and then review. Then you would look at it very again quickly. Did you get the main argument and the most important points? Get everything you need for your work? Any references, quotations recorded correctly? What did you miss? Okay. Now this is key because you don't want to have to be writing your literature review, or even like you don't want to be like on July 30th to be like, oh shoot, I missed something, and then need to go back. You just want to be able to go back to your notes and just copy paste or whatever and look at it again. You don't want to have to go back to the article and reread the whole thing. I can tell you, I spent so much of my life rereading articles over and over again because I forgot. Okay, so just take good notes. Okay, SQ3R: survey, question, read, record, review. Okay, get everything down. Okay, and then when it comes to actually write your literature review, you'll have done all of the work that it's really easy to just kind of paste it in. Okay, obviously you need to re-summarize, you need to explain how it deals with the larger conversation. But if you take really good notes, you're kind of already starting the writing process. Okay, all right. Lastly, writing up, narrow your topic. Okay, yeah. So literature review will help you narrow your topic. So some of you still might be at a quite general place. It's like, is Cantopop important to Hong Kong identity? Okay, you need to get even more detailed. Is ludology important for understanding visual narratives? Okay, yeah, that's still quite general. What aspect of ludology? What is it about choice in games? That has to do with visual narrative. How? And then your question is gonna get more and more specific, more and more specific. When it comes to Cantopop, it's like, is it important that it's canto or is it important that it's pop? Is it important that it's the lyrics? Is that what people say? And is the lyric a way to understand its cultural value, or is it also in the way that Cantopop would be the first to borrow American pop or Western European pop and its kind of standards, such as new types of rhythms, new types of R&B sound, rhythm and blues, new types of group formations and that kind of thing. Okay, and is that what made Cantopop popular? So these are the kind of you need to know what everyone else has said before you're going to have a real accurate idea of what your research needs to do. Okay, find a focus. Okay, this is key. So you want your focus to be very, very clear. Organize around ideas. What themes or issues connect your sources together? Do they present one or different solutions? How well do they present the material, and do they portray it according to an appropriate theory? Do they reveal a trend in the field, a debate? Pick one of these themes to focus and organize the review. So sometimes you're going to read a few red herrings. You're going to read kind of scholarship articles that are not useful, not well written. They talk about kind of what you're trying to say, but they are not really saying anything worthwhile or interesting. Just because you took notes on it and read it doesn't mean it goes in your literature review. Okay, if it doesn't fit, just cut it. If it doesn't add to your conversation, leave it out. Okay, so it's important to remember that every time you cite someone, even if you're critical, you're still kind of like honoring them in a way. If you critique something that someone has said, you're kind of doing them justice. You're saying like, okay, what you said is worth talking about, even though I disagree with it. Okay, or even though I think that it misses a few things. That's important. You need to, whereas the people who don't get cited at all, that's the stuff, or the scholarship that does not get cited is the stuff that's not worth mentioning. Okay, so if it doesn't add to your kind of conversation, don't include it. Okay, all right, so that's the literature review. So your literature review then is going to be pretty long. All right, it's going to be the kind of it's going to take up quite a bit of your first chapter, whether that's an introduction or a chapter, kind of up to you. But it's really, really key. So for me, as a grader, I'm always going to be looking at the literature review and making sure that the literature review kind of demonstrates the importance and value of the research. Okay, and also how well it educates me and brings me up to date on what's going on in the field. Okay, so the literature review really is like the homework section. Okay, that then justifies the methodology, the choice of subject, your corpus, and also your methodological approach to that corpus, and explains why it is that that methodology and approach to the corpus and choice of corpus is useful for answering the overall research question. Okay, all right, so yeah, that's the importance of literature review. So that's it for now. What I will do is then I'm going to give you some feedback on your individual writing work, the worksheets that you did already, and then be prepared to do your annotated bibliography and an example, and part of your literature review. Remember, I want your literature review to overall for the dissertation to be much longer. So the more you write now, the better off you'll be. So I recommend you write more for that. Okay. All right. That's it. Please write and include any any questions you have and feedback about this lecture in the forum, so that I can then answer it there, so all of your classmates can read it as well. Okay, that's it, and I will talk to you later. Bye.